It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
Rico Brogna time. How we doing? Welcome to another edition of the Rico, episode 569. I do feel like it's that time of year where I have to remind people, or some of our new listeners, I need to explain to them, because every once in a while I will get emails or people on the streets or people that call up and say, why is it called Rico Brogna? And I feel like every once in a while I need to offer an explanation. I loved Rico Brogna. He was a wonderful baseball player for the New York Mets in the mid-90s during my formative age. I loved watching him defend at first base. He was an incredibly underrated defender. Every time my dad or Beningo would say Keith Hernandez was the best, I'd say, what about Rico? I thought he was that good. And so when the idea came to me a few years ago about starting this Mets-centric podcast, I was like, let's name it after Rico Brogna. So there you go. That's why it's called the Rico. My name is not Rico. My last name is not Brogna. Rico has appeared on the podcast. He is a wonderful human being, but that's why it's called the Rico. So I feel like every, 3 months, I almost have to repeat that story. But anyhow, the point of today's episode is actually very important. All right, this is arguably the most important Rico Brogna we have ever done, because we have graded the position players from 2025. We've graded the starters from 2025. We've graded different aspects of the Mets bullpen from this past year. But today we grade the man from Milwaukee himself. Today we grade the president of the New York Mets, David Stearns. We'll also grade Carlos Mendoza, but the focus of today's podcast, this edition of the Rico, is David Stearns. And here's how we're going to do it. We are going to go through all of his moves. I'm not kidding. All of his moves. We're going to go through the offseason. We're going to go to the trade deadline. We're going to go to the guys he didn't sign, the guys he did sign. And when it's all said and done, we're going to grade him. But I want to play a game, all right? And that is a game that you guys can play at home. Before we get into any of the moves he made, off the top of your head, how do you grade David Stearns? I want you to think about that grade. I want you to remember that grade. And then let's see if it changes, because there may be moves you forgot about, or players they didn't acquire that they could have acquired that you forgot about. And maybe the grade will go up, but in all likelihood, the grade will go down. So let's begin with the guys that he decided to let go of, right? These are the guys that were free agents that basically David Stearns decided we're not going to bring these guys back. And really, there are four main cogs in this. Number one is Luis Severino. Luis Severino ended up signing a 3-year, $67 million contract with the Athletics. So got a really good deal, 3 years, 67. He ended up making 29 starts for the A's. He pitched 162 innings, and he pitched to a high ERA of 4.54. But keep in mind, Sevy had home road splits that were really extreme, which leads one to believe that if the Mets had kept Luis Severino, he wouldn't have pitched to a 4.5 ERA. He would have been a lot better than that. You know, at the time when this move was made, when the Mets allowed him to walk, I was not angry. You can go back into the archives of the Rico if you really wanted. Sometimes that's entertaining, actually. When you listen to a Rico Brogna from like 9 months ago and you already know the result of what's going to end up happening, sometimes that can be entertaining, but I think we were all good with it. Now, we were cautious about what the Mets were going to do and how they were going to fill the rotation, but I think there was some concern about Sevy staying healthy, which he was able to do with the Mets, but was unable to do prior to that with the New York Yankees, and would he be able to replicate his success? A part of grading David Stearns is we can be honest about how we felt at the time, but we also have to look at it and say, was that a good move or not? Doesn't matter if we were right or wrong. We're not the team president. We can sit here today in the middle of October and say, that turned out to be smart. That turned out to be dumb. So, Hoff, when I tell you that Luis Severino signed a 3-year contract for $67 million and he made 29 starts, pitched to a 4.54 ERA into 162 innings, did the Mets make a right decision by letting Luis Severino go?
I think so. I know that some people will say otherwise. They thought that, you know, he had something here and he was comfortable here in New York and the pitching staff was good and the pitching lab was good to him. But I think that we kind of had fool's gold last year. It was good, but I think Stearns was smart to move on from Severino. I just wish there was something else better that he would have moved to.
I think what makes the Sevy question, there are two things that make it challenging to me. Number one, if they had kept him, who was the pitcher they weren't signing? If the answer is Frankie Montas, then horrible move.
Yeah.
If the answer is Sean Manaea, I think we could still say horrible move, but the jury is still out because obviously there were years left on Manaea's contract, much like there is Sevy. And the other thing about Sevy that's complicated, and I want to give you guys the specific numbers because it matters. At home in Sacramento, he was 2-9 with a 6.01 ERA. On the road, he was 6-2 with a 3.02 ERA. So there is certainly reason to believe that by pitching at Citi Field, that the numbers would have been closer to that, like a low 3 ERA, than what he ended up doing. So I'm going to be honest with you. The jury is still out on the final 2 years of the deal, but in the short term, the Mets could have used Luis Severino.
I get you. I'm not going to fight you so much on it again. Like if it meant, and you know me, I'm Clay Holmes. Like I'm not ecstatic that he was he did great the experiment worked as a fifth starter. But here's the thing: is if you're telling me that they would have signed Luis Severino and they wouldn't have gotten Clay Holmes, which would you have rathered? Clay Holmes was the guy.
That complicates it, no doubt about it. The other guy they let go was Jose Quintana. This one, so Jose Quintana didn't sign for a very long time, and he ended up signing in the middle of spring training on a 1-year deal for $4 million, which is just stupid to think about. I was okay with letting Quintana go once the Mets faced injuries in spring training. We all kind of said this is a no-brainer to bring him back. And then when he ended up signing for such a minimal amount of money, even with the tax that the Mets pay, this was a massive mistake. And not a massive mistake in terms of they should have signed him in January, but once there were injuries and his price tag was so low, he was the perfect depth guy. He goes out this year for Milwaukee, makes 24 starts, pitches to a 3.96 ERA, those 131 innings, and he does it at $4 million a year. So I think if we look at the timestamp correctly, the mistake was not bringing him in for depth in the middle of March once they were facing injuries.
Yeah, but I think that I believe even when they signed like Griffin Canning, for example, I was like, why would you just have not signed Jose Quintana then? Like, we're going to take another gamble on somebody else? Like, Quintana has shown as long as he's healthy, which is maybe part of the issue, as long as he's healthy, he's a solid pitcher. And all we were looking to do was fill in the back end of the rotation. We were looking like, we're set in the front, just back end rotation. I think we could have made that move in January or February too. I think that we could have done it earlier.
Letting Phil Maton go 1 year, $2 million to the Cardinals, whatever, relievers, they come and go. Harrison Bader. The Mets let Harrison Bader go 1 year, $6.2 million to Minnesota. Obviously ends up getting traded to the Phillies. Look, this one really, really, really turned out bad because Bader ended up having such a good year for Minnesota, such a good year for Philadelphia. And in turn, and this was one of the early trades that David Stearns made, he acquired Jose Siri from the Tampa Bay Rays for Eric Orsi. Eric Orsi would go on and make 33 appearances and pitch to a 3.02 ERA out of the bullpen for Tampa Bay. So, colossal mistake, clearly. And I'm Monday morning quarterbacking this because, look, to me, letting Bader go wasn't that big of a deal. I thought that bringing Siri in offered, a lot of potential. He's got some pop. He's got that energy. And let's not forget this about Bader. He was benched last year in the postseason. So, for as much success as he brought Philadelphia, and even the success he had with the Yankees in the playoffs a few years earlier, he was not a big part of this team's run in 2024. But as we sit here today, massive mistake letting Harrison Bader go and trading a quality reliever for Jose Siri, who was an all-time debacle for the Mets.
And I can understand why people think that Bader was, they needed to move on from him because, again, he didn't play. Part of it is health-wise, like we talked about in some of the previous podcasts. Part of the best, ability is availability. And I think he had some injury issues definitely towards the end of the season last year too, which is why Taylor ended up getting the starting role, but we were basically banking on two center fielders between Tyrone Taylor and Jose Siri, and you saw it early on when we faced Bader in Minnesota. He had it out for the Mets. That's all I'm going to say. He had it out for the Mets.
He did. I mean, who knows? Maybe in his head he kept hearing some schmucky WFAN and podcast host saying, fourth outfielder. I'll show him. Well, he did, because he had an absolutely wonderful season. And there's no denying that, Bader bringing him back for that value and not trading Eric Orsi for Jose Siri, the Mets would have been better off. And that gets into one of the early trades that David Stearns made, which was acquiring Jose Siri for Eric Orsi. The other trades and signings that he made, those are the guys he lost. Here are the signings. Siri for Orsi, we just touched on. Signing Frankie Montas to a 2-year, $34 million deal. I'll tell you, man, when they signed Frankie Montas, and we said it here on the Rico, I said it on WFAN, I'll say it now, it felt like a heat check moment for the pitching lab. Like, oh, okay, well, they figured out Sevy. They figured out their rotation last year. Sean Manaea and the arm angle and the great year that he had. Maybe they could figure out Frankie Montas. I think we all found ourselves almost believing the own hype of the pitching lab that they would be able to figure Frankie Montas out. And truthfully, as bad as Montas has been the last couple of years in terms of reliability and in terms of not being that good when he's pitched, it couldn't have been worse. Like, honestly, I couldn't have imagined it being worse. He barely pitches. He gets bombed in rehab games. The Mets are so desperate, they have to call him up anyway. He has one good start where we're like, oh, okay, rehab doesn't matter. Then he sucks again. And the only positive was that Stearns and Mendy pulled the plug when they did. And they've shown, I give them credit, because I know a lot of this pod today is going to be negative, rightfully so. They pull the plug when guys suck. They did it on Joey Wendell, and they did it on Frankie Montas. But my God, that was an awful contract. He has a player option. I can't imagine he's going to say no, considering he too is having Tommy John surgery. But hopefully insurance covers a lot of it. This was an all-time bad one, deciding to invest in Frankie Montas.
Now, do you feel like the pitching lab took a big hit off of this too? I mean, like we bought into it. We bought into the fact that like everybody that they brought in, where they were just going to turn around and they were going to fix, they were going to find the best version of themselves. And hey, there were some guys that they still did this year have success with, but Frankie Montas went so far the other way, wasted time. And here's the thing that bothers me more than anything else. I've had this conversation with some people. Frankie Montas, I don't recall having a good season since sometime with the A's, like 6, 7, 8 maybe years ago. I don't even remember. The fact that he signed a 2-year deal with the option, like you said, for $34 million, that's kind of pricey. Like Quintana was so much cheaper. I understand it was because he was later on when he signed, but it wasn't like they got Montas for like a really good deal.
And that's what makes it worse. So in this exercise of talking about money he handed out and players they brought in, you could easily look at guys they could have signed. Matthew Boyd signed a 2-year, $29 million contract with the Chicago Cubs. Let's just start right there. You talk about other guys they could have brought in. Matthew Boyd ended up having a pretty good year with the Chicago Cubs, started postseason games. He got less than Frankie Montas. Hold on a second. I'm having a leak over here. I dropped my water, and I want to make sure it doesn't hit my old scorebooks. That's my priority.
No.
All right, I moved the books out of the way. Anything else that gets wet, who cares?
Yeah, those books are money, bro.
But think about that. Matthew Boyd, 2 years, $29 million. Shane Bieber, 2 years, $26 million. I want to be fair about this, though. Walker Buehler, 1 year, $21 million. We all love that move. That one would have failed. Nick Pivetta, 4 years, $45. I mean, that's not a lot of money. It's a lot of years, but 4 years, $45 for Pivetta, who ended up having a great year. So I think what makes it worse is you look at some of the other options, and they were all better than Frankie Montas. Clay Holmes, 3 years, $38 million. I think we were all very skeptical when this deal went down, with the thought being, hey, if he can convert into a good starting pitcher, this is great value in terms of AAV. This one worked. And I think we all pretty much agree that Clay Holmes deserves the opportunity to be in the rotation in 2026. I'm not going to rely on him as the number one, the number two, or even the number three. But in terms of being a solid fourth starter, maybe even a fifth starter for a rotation, $15 million a year is certainly not that bad. And that's it's actually less than that because it's 3 years, 38. So you're really looking at about $12.5, $13 million a year. And yeah, if it doesn't work out, much like we said this year, they still have that bullpen option, which could be used. But I'm encouraged by Clay Holmes mainly because that was year one as a starting pitcher. And overall, we have to admit it wasn't a bad year by any stretch.
I'm shaking my head going, they got him for 3 years, $38 million, and they gave Frankie Montas 2 years, 34. Oh, my God, that's even worse than I thought. Here's the thing. When you just isolate the idea of Clay Holmes coming in as a back end of the rotation guy, yes, they nailed it. It worked out. I'm just disappointed at that was what they're holding their hat to as one of their better moves this season was we were able to nail down a fifth starter. I think we could have gone through anybody on this roster and said, yeah, you got a bunch of fifth starters.
Yeah, I get it. But still, you got to look at the value and say that one worked, if we're being fair.
Yes.
There is one other player they lost in free agency that I don't want to forget about because I know there's a lot of people that deem this maybe their biggest loss, and that's Jose Iglesias, who, of course, signed with the San Diego Padres in spring training. Jose Iglesias ended up playing 112 games, hit .229, 592 OPS, and had a negative .7 WAR. We get it. He was awful offensively. He didn't come anywhere close to matching the OMG of 2024. I don't know how to value the other stuff. I really don't. I think they probably missed the leadership of J.D. Martinez more than they missed Jose Iglesias. But nevertheless, I do want to point it out. If he was on this team producing at that clip, I don't think him being a catchy pop star was going to change anything. And also, I got to tell you, a year later now, we'd have to admit it would have made the Mets worse. Because even though Luis Angel Acuna didn't hit when he was here, he provided something. He provided really good defense, which I know Iglesias could do, but he also provided that ability to steal a base, which Iglesias didn't really have. So if we're just thinking strictly baseball in that super utility role that we were envisioning him for, it was going to be at the expense of Luis Angel Acuna. And they probably benefited a little bit more having a guy like Acuna who has that speed and versatility coming off of the bench than Iglesias, who basically gave you just god-awful production this season.
Right, and here's the thing about Iglesias. Last year, it was, I don't want to say it was like luck, but, I mean, again, it wasn't like he was ripping home runs every day. It would, getting like these unbelievable hits. He was getting contact. He was hitting, maybe he got a couple extra base hits here and there, but it's basically singles. And sometimes that's all you need. But he was getting on base because of just good quality at bats, getting on base because of contact and putting him where the players' defenses weren't. But that's not happening every year. And you saw it in San Diego. He wasn't productive. So I think his bat would have been a lot lesser here again. Last year was everything worked out for Jose Iglesias.
I'm going to give you statistics of a player, and you tell me if the Mets could have used this in 2025. You ready? 47 appearances out of the bullpen. 3 starts, but really 47 appearances out of the bullpen, 101 innings, which means you're a multi-inning reliever, and an ERA of 2.50. You think the Mets could have used that this season?
Yeah, I think so.
That would be Mike Vassell, who they lost in the Rule 5 draft to the Philadelphia Phillies, who then sold him to the Chicago White Sox. Just saying. Just want to point that out. That's a minor one, but a big one. Just pointing it out. Like we talk about losing free agents, signing free agents, making trades, losing Mike Vassell. They could have used him, just like they could have used Eric Orsi, who they traded for Jose Siri. Let's get to some of the big stuff because it would be foolish to ignore. The New York Mets signed a free agent. I'm not sure you guys remember this guy. They signed a fellow by the name of Juan Soto to a 15-year, $765 million contract. Before anybody says, come on, Ev, you can't use this. David Stearns didn't sign him. Steve Cohen did. We got to be fair here. I get it. Steve Cohen has a big checkbook. Steve Cohen was meeting with Scott Boras. He is the team president, And if we're going to get on him for every little move that we hate, we have to at least give some credit to the big one. This was a no-brainer. We all wanted Juan Soto. It was not the unrockiest of years for him in his first year with the Mets, but I think ultimately it was a success. So are we happy 1 year in to the Juan Soto contract?
Happy is strange term because not happy about how the season ended.
Yeah.
But let's put it this way. When you set the record or for season attendance, I think the fans showed that they got what they wanted and they supported the move and they supported this team. So, yeah, I think overall we are happy with what's going to go on. And I don't care what anybody says, Ev. I know it's year one of potentially 15 years. Obviously, he could opt out in 4 more years. So we'll see if that's something he chooses to do. By the way, if he does opt out, you know what that means? He had a monster 5 years. So Go ahead, opt the hell out. Let's kick in that little, buffer that says, "Hey, you ain't going anywhere. We'll give you 5 more million."
Well, that's the beauty of the opt out. Like it's a fugazi opt out. It's just a way to make sure you add extra money to your docket. And obviously, if the Mets say, "You know what? We've gotten enough out of you. We don't believe you in the future," they have the right to say no, and Juan can re-enter free agency. But as we learned with Garrett Cole, Juan Soto could opt out. The Mets could say, "Yes, screw it. We don't want to pay you." And then Scott Boras can come back and say, just kidding. Which is what he did in the Garrett Cole situation.
April Fools. Just kidding.
Yeah, look, Soto's a brilliant offensive player. We saw his warts defensively. The locker room stuff, something was different about the room. Him and Lindor aren't very close. He doesn't follow him on Instagram. I don't get nuts about that. You got 26 guys in a room. Not everyone's going to like each other. I don't think their failures had to do with that. I think it definitely, and we've talked about it a little bit so far this offseason, we will continue, brings up the leadership question of bringing in personalities that may help lead. I brought up Giancarlo Stanton a few episodes ago. We talked about Kyle Schwarber and how respected he's in the Philly room, the value of bringing Starling Marte back. Like, all that is certainly valid, but we're 1 year into the Soto signing. I'm thrilled he's a Met. I am. Obviously, the results of the season did not work out the way we dreamt of the night we were all celebrating here on the Rico. But, yeah, it was a good signing by David Stearns, even if we don't want to give him credit. Pete Alonso, same thing. They got him back on that 2-year, $54 million deal. Obviously turned into a 1-year contract, making $30. He's going to opt out. And you know what? Ultimately, it worked because Pete had a really good season. What this turns into in the next contract, we'll obviously see. But good job by David Stearns and Steve Cohen making sure those guys came back.
You know what, Ev, the one question I have for you, and maybe we'll dive into it later on and stuff like that, but, they did this deal last minute. Do you expect them to do another, last-minute deal with him again, or do you think this is going to go a little bit smoother of an offseason for him?
I don't think it's going to go into February, no. I've been debating in my head when I think this is going to end. Does it happen winter meeting style, kind of like the Soto signing? Like, all right, here's my market. Here are the teams that are interested. Let's go. I kind of lean towards that only because I think there's going to be a market for him. And I think when there's a market for a player, it tends to move quicker. I think if Boras is insistent on 7 years, it may not move that quick. But I think if Scott says, look, I got a market for him, let's take the bids, let's see what happens, I think you could be looking at a pre-Christmas, mid-December kind of signing. If it doesn't happen, then I think it would be January. I don't think it's going to go to spring training, though. I don't, because I think that was a standoff because he didn't have suitors. I think he's going to have suitors this time.
Yeah, and again, that was – you talk about an offseason that was very weird, right? Like, we're sitting there basically trying to, predict, well, if they don't bring back Alonso, the first baseman's Vientos?
Yeah.
And you after this year, you go, thank God that didn't happen.
And it's a different thought this year because last year they added Soto. So the idea of, all right, we lost Pete, that sucks, we'll pivot with Vientos, you could still have made the argument, hey, they're better off. They flipped out Alonso for Soto. This year is far different. Like they are, I do compare it to DeGrom in that when they lost DeGrom, they had to pivot and they pivoted to Verlander. I think if they lose Alonso, they're going to have to pivot to some kind of big bat because it's asking a lot for your fans and it's also asking a lot out of young players to think you're going to replace that production internally. That's not a fair thing to ask.
You imagine they trade for Stanton? That's their pivot.
Well, I mean, I like that idea. I've thrown it out there.
You get the leader in the locker room, but then you miss now who's playing first base? Soto.
Well, I think that figuring out first base is less complicated than figuring out how to replace 125 RBIs.
Well, yeah.
All right, next up on some of these David Stearns moves during the offseason, signing A.J. Minter to a 2-year, $22 million deal. So it's funny. Let's go back to when they signed Minter. We were all enamored with Tanner Scott. And Tanner Scott was a failure this year. I guess it's a reminder that these relievers are just so freaking risky. But Tanner Scott was the apple of our eyes. The Dodgers ended up getting him. He did not have a good regular season, had some injury issues. They signed A.J. Minter to a 2-year, $22 million deal. I think we were mostly excited about that. He made that strong comment, anti-Yankee comment at Amazing Day. And unfortunately for Minter, it was about health. He does have an option for year 2, which we'll find out about in the next couple of weeks. I assume he's going to pick that up. This is one of those moves you look at and say, you kind of know the risk going in. You're adding a reliever. He was coming off an injury. Obviously, it did not work, but we all liked it at the time. I look at some of the other relievers that signed. I mentioned Tanner Scott. You think about Kirby Yates. How many of them would have worked? You talked about trading for Devin Williams. That was your big thing. I don't know what they would have had to have given up. I thought the Brewers ended up doing really well. I mean, Caleb Durbin is one of their more important players. So I'm not sure how the Mets would have matched up and how that would have worked, because obviously Devin had major issues with the Yankees until the very end. So I try to look at the comparables in terms of other guys they could have added. There weren't a lot of great options, but obviously the A.J. Minter thing did not work.
And it's disappointing because it did work while he pitched. But we talked about this over and over and over, availability, and not able to do that. But and you got to hope that next year, because it's a 2-year deal, you got to hope that next year he does return, kind of like the Brooks Raley role, where, hey, he's in at a good time in the season. Maybe there's going to be a ton of injuries like we've always deal with every year, and he pops in July or August, and he's able to kind of round out that bullpen and be like the relief pitcher that we need at that time.
I'll give you some of the other relievers that signed for comparable deals, and we could all decide they would have been better off, worse off. Tanner Scott signed for 4 years, $72 million, which is just crazy. And so that obviously did not work. Jeff Hoffman, 3 years, $33. I mean, he was solid, obviously pitched, so that's certainly a lot better. Carlos Estevez, who signed with Kansas City, signed for basically the same deal. 2 years, $22 million. Blake Trinan, 2 years, $22 million. David Robertson was in the middle of the season. We all screamed about that. They should have added him. 1 year, $15 million. Aroldis Chapman. Boy, I'll tell you. That one I definitely got wrong, but I also don't know if Chapman would have come here as a setup man, but he ended up signing on a 1 year, $10.7 million deal. Andrew Kittredge would have been a good signing, 1 year, $10 million. Tommy Kahnle, 1 year, $7.7. Jonathan Loaizaga, who they were into, ended up getting hurt, 1 year, $5 million. So there were some that would have worked, but for the most part, I think the A.J. Minter thing was sound. It just, unfortunately, health got in the way. Sean Manaea. The New York Mets kept Sean Manaea. We did a live Rico. I think I had just driven down to North Carolina. 3 years, $75 million. It was a disaster. I mean, it's a disaster so far, and I do think it creates the questions of, all right, well, what about next year? Is Sean Manaea even guaranteed a rotation spot? And the reason I don't think he is one of the compliments I have about David Stearns, we talked about it already, is that they hold people accountable. Frankie Montas wasn't good enough. Boom. I don't care that you're making $17 million. So I don't think it's out of the question that Sean Manaea may not be guaranteed a rotation spot. Hopefully he's healthy. The bone chip issues turned out not to be, according to Sean, but it was a really bad year one for Sean Manaea not being healthy, and then once he got healthy, being very ineffective.
Yeah, I hold out hope that he just was battling through injuries, and that's why this year was so bad. Again, he had a high strikeout total. So he's able to still put away guys, but he definitely he got lit up. If he left the cookie over the plate, they'd send it to the seats. It's a bad move. It really is. It's a really bad move so far. And it's just the first year of 3. So
yeah. It's tough to imagine him being a lefty reliever out of the bullpen, but when I say not guaranteed a rotation spot, here's how I can see this happening. I think they're going to try to trade Kodai Senga. I don't know how successful they're going to be. I don't know what his value is. I mean, you would think that teams could look at the price tag not being that high, only makes $15 million, which is not a lot for a starting pitcher. Look at his success in the first half and say, we can fix him. If they don't trade Kodai Senga, is it possible the Mets look at Senga Manaea as a tag team in 2026? We saw a little bit of the tag team stuff late in the 25 season. I'm a fan of it. I think it can work. I think you can make it work on a roster. I don't think it's that complicated. And we know about Senga and needing to pitch every 6 days. Well, maybe he doesn't have to pitch every 6 days if he's only pitching 3 or 4 innings. So I wonder if that's something they'd be open to. I think they should be, because you got to get the most out of your players. And it's possible the most you're going to get out of Senga and Manaea is 4 or 5 innings. And if you combine them, voila, that gets you through a full game.
Well, I was going to say, that was the one thing I actually, they cracked the code on that. That's the one thing that, I'm not sure if they're the first team to ever be like, hey, you know what, let's just put these 2 pitchers together and we should get good 6 to 7 good innings out of them. But they definitely did it more than any other team this season, that's for sure. And you don't have to just do it with Senga. You could do it with multiple people, because, say, for example, if Senga does go deep into a game, God forbid he did that, right? Say he's having a good start and it's the 5th inning, we're up 3 runs. Let's go give Senga another inning. And it gives you that. You don't have to pitch Manaea that day. You can go and sandwich somebody else the next day.
Absolutely. The thing that annoyed me so much about the 2 postseason games, the 2 winner-take-all games that we saw a few days ago, was almost this predetermined commitment to pulling your starting pitcher. George Kirby should not have been pulled. There was no reason to pull him. Jacob Misarowski, and obviously they did the opener situation, but Misarowski was great. There was no reason to pull him. And it's almost like sometimes managers are just so committed to saying, all right, I got enough out of him. If a guy's riding, continue to ride them. Another classic move was bringing back Jesse Winker. 1-year deal, $7.5 million. We were all good with it. This was another disaster. He barely played. When he did play, he wasn't very productive. I heard a lot about the Mets missing his energy. Well, it's tough to provide energy when you can't play. Would I bring Jesse Winker back in 2026? I guess you just can't rely on him. You want to bring him back as a 4th or 5th outfielder? Sure, but the Mets were relying on him as the left-handed bat in a DH platoon, and he could just never get healthy. Even when he finally came back, he was back for 2 days in the middle of July, and we never saw him again. So just another, we're going through all these moves. They're all bad. There's very few good ones. The Jesse Winker re-signing was a bad move.
But here's my question, Ev. We're talking about, again, this goes back to the Clay Holmes stuff too. He worked out as a 5th starter. I can't stand the fact that this year, and maybe it's just because it was a bunch of bad moves and we're looking at trying to figure out the best ones. So the ones that float to the top are these lackluster moves, but they worked out. So let's give a little credit there. But the fact that we're talking about energy guys so much and all this other stuff, it's how about we look for talent? How about we look for guys? Juan Soto was the talent. Okay, we got that. But that's also should be the numero uno idea of this is who we should bring to a team, a guy who's able to put up crazy good numbers and add to our team on top of all the other good players or future good players we have.
Well, who else was kind of in that boat as a free agent in that DH left-handed bat role? The one that jumped out at me was Jock Peterson. And Jock Peterson, who signed 2-year, $37 million deal, which was a lot more money than Jesse Winker. He absolutely sucked. He was a bigger disaster than Jesse Winker. Winker's disaster was not playing. Anthony Santander was another guy we're maybe he'll take a short-term deal. He ended up signing a 5-year, $92 million deal, and he was an out-and-out disaster. We talked about Michael Conforto coming back on a 1-year deal, $17 million. That was a disaster. So you look at some of the other options. Jurickson Profar ended up getting busted for a PED suspension. A lot of these bats that kind of fit that mold, they did not work out. I guess Ramon Laureano signing a 1-year deal for $4 million would have been the ultimate steal. And then they had a chance to fix that by acquiring him at the trade deadline. That didn't work either. How about this one? Jared Young. The Mets signed Jared Young to a 1-year deal for $1 million. No,
I guess that
doesn't do anything for you.
I guess that worked, right? Like that's on the level of Clay Holmes. It worked. He was a bench player, time to time.
Nick Madrigal. You guys remember Nick Madrigal? He was going to be the Jose Iglesias replacement, 1-year deal, $1.3 million. I feel bad because he got hurt, and we never got to see the beauty of Nick Madrigal. Griffin Canning. Griffin Canning signed a 1-year deal, $4.2 million. Look, that was one of his better value moves until he got hurt. But he was pitching well. That was another example of maybe the lab was working. We haven't seen the last of Griffin Canning. I fully expect that the Mets will probably bring him back on one of those 1+1 deals where they rehab him a little bit from the injury, and then maybe we see him pitch. That could have been a great move. Unfortunately, it didn't work out. Some of his other deals was signing Justin Hageman.
Hold on. I have a question about that. Because we all know this, like the whole pitching staff basically got fired. So who's the person in charge? Who was the guy that was in charge of Griffin Canning that really had him, figure out his to get to him as good as possible?
Jeremy Hefner. He was the pitching coach.
Well, he's gone now. So why would they bring him back?
Well, you don't get rid of guys just because the coaching staff isn't back. I mean, I'm sure that Stearns and the front office saw something in Griffin Canning, which they looked right about in terms of why they acquired him. So I think and we don't even know who's going to be on this pitching coach staff, who the pitching coach is going to be, who's going to be on the staff. But remember, the front office is determining the pieces, and then the coaching staff works with them. I don't think they're making any signings because they were advised by Jeremy Hefner necessarily. It's just, here's your pieces, now figure it out. It just sucks because that one was a good move, and it looked like a good move, and it smelt like a good move. And I don't know where the season would have gone for Canning. I mean, it's possible the league would have figured him out. He would have been terrible, certainly. But he was pitching well, and it's just unfortunate we didn't get to see the end of it. So those are the offseason moves. Those are the guys that they could have had. We mentioned some of the names. Those are the guys that they let go. Those are the guys they signed. A few of the other people we should mention before we get to the midseason trades. I wanted them to sign Corbin Burns. That would not have worked, obviously. Some wanted them to sign Max Fried. That would have worked, at least in year one. The trading for Garrett Crochet, let's get to that. Mm-hmm. I remember when we talked about it, I was intrigued by it, but I was nervous about it. I was nervous about what the package was going to cost. And I don't know if the Mets had the package that was going to entice Chicago the way the Red Sox did. Remember this about deals, and we'll deal with this a lot during the offseason. I try to find comps. I try to say, okay, they gave up this prospect, this prospect, this prospect. Here's our equivalent. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. If they like your prospects more, you have a leg up. If they don't, you don't. I don't know what it was going to take to get Garrett Crochet. I have heard that the names being mentioned were like Nolan McLean and Jet Williams and Brandon Sproat. And look, Garrett Crochet had a great year. And if the Mets could have Garrett Crochet, that'd be amazing. I just don't know what that package looked like for me to stand up on the chair and scream, you guys are idiots for not doing it. I think now, looking at the next Garrett Crochet, the next pitcher to be available, we're probably all going to want to be super aggressive to acquire them because I think those guys have more of a track record than Crochet. Crochet had one good year. And remember, they were babying him at the end, in which he wasn't even pitching full starts. Now, with that said, Crochet did it, man. He had a great year with the Boston Red Sox. I don't know how close the Mets got. I'm not sure how deep the negotiations got and what the players were. But, yeah, I mean, Crochet was a guy that was certainly intriguing during the offseason to try to target and acquire.
I know people are going to kill me for this, but I'm at this point in my life where if you could do something to add an ace, I'm almost willing to do it. Even if it was if you told me all those names you said before, McLean, Sproat, Williams, if you took out one of those names, I'd probably pull the trigger.
Yeah, but Hoff. I'm with you, right? if the Detroit Tigers came to us today and said, you can get Tarek Skubal and you got to give up boop, boop, we're all probably, even with 1 year left on his deal, going to say, F it, go get him. Garrett Crochet had 1 year as a starting pitcher, and he threw 146 innings. Were you that convinced he was the guy? He turned out to be the guy. I give him all the credit in the world. He led the league in effing innings this year. Forget his ERA. He threw 205 innings. Like, God bless the guy. But that was not Tarek Skubal becoming available. I just want to be fair about it.
You're right. There was pessimism behind what he could really do. Again, the fact that he was getting babied and all that stuff. He never really proved that he could be an elite pitcher before, up until last year. So yes, you're 100% right. But on the other hand, too, like, we made a ton of risks. And again, it's different capital that we're giving up. We're giving up different levels of prospects. I get it. But we made a ton of risks during this trade deadline to get 4 players in here as rentals. And we'll get to them in a few, but they didn't work out as well as we thought.
Yeah. Some of the other starting pitchers, Nate Eovaldi signed for the exact same deal as Sean Manaea. 3 years, $75 million. Did Nate want to come back to New York? I don't know. I mean, maybe he had a preference of staying in Texas, but boy, that would have changed things. Eovaldi was having an incredible year until he got hurt late in the season. We mentioned Nick Pivetta, 4 years, $55 million. Jack Flaherty, 2 years, $35 million. Matthew Boyd, 2 years, $29 million. Max Fried, I never thought that they were going to be interested in. Blake Snell, same thing. So those are the guys that kind of fit like the other starting pitching options. For an offseason, this is bad. I mean, I would say that, Soto brings up the grade, and I'm sorry for those that don't want to include him. We have to. Alonso brings up the grade, but all these other moves that were so important towards building the team, they were mostly bad. So I'm going to say that his offseason, I want to give him a C- Hoff, but I'll tell you, man, it's tough when you added Juan Soto. I'm sorry. I almost need to take it out as much as I don't want to take it out.
Hold on a second. They had how many wins last year? 89, 88, 89 wins?
89 wins.
Right, and they made the playoffs. And then they bring in Juan Soto, and they were so bad that they had 83 wins and didn't make the playoffs, and they missed out on the final day of the season. That is bad, dude.
That's the results of the season, though. I'm talking about those moves, the off-season moves. A lot of things lead to losing 6 games in the standings. I'm talking about the off-season. They were mostly bad moves. I mean, we just went through all of them. They were mostly bad, but I can't just ignore they added Juan Soto and kept Pete Alonso and just say, well, that doesn't count.
But hold on a second. This goes back to when Sandy Alderson played the games with Yoenis Cespedes. Like, they traded for Cespedes that 1 year.
Yeah,
he was a free agent. They signed him. He had part of that contract was he could opt out. The next year they opted out again. So for 2 years in a row, the big offseason move was we brought back Yoenis Cespedes. That to me is not a move. Where's the addition? Where are you adding to?
They added Juan Soto.
Hold on. So Pete Alonso, first of all, is flush. That's a you should have had that done to begin with, right? Like when Edwin Diaz signed right away, you should have brought back Pete Alonso. So the only thing they did was this offseason was Juan Soto. That's it. That's an obvious. He's the best player available in baseball, and you have the richest owner of baseball. You better freaking get him. You better. After all you promised, you better get him.
Season grade for David Stearns?
D+.
D+. Okay.
D+.
Yeah, I think history is going to judge us very badly if we sit here and give him a C, or in your case, a D+ on the offseason where they added Juan Soto. That's all I'm saying. It was not a good offseason. We just went through all the moves. I get that. We all just did it together. It's just adding Soto is valuable, but I'm still going to give him a C, despite all that. I think his offseason moves are a C. Manaea bad, not bringing back Quintana as kind of an added, let's get some depth, bad. Clay Holmes, solid. AJ Minter could have been good, disastrous. Frankie Montas, biggest disaster ever. Handling of center field, abysmal. So I think you add it all together, you get a C. Let's get to the trade deadline stuff. Ooh. He ended up making 4 deals right around the trade deadline. Tyler Rogers, Ryan Helsley, Gregory Soto, and Cedric Mullins. They are all free agents. And I would venture to tell you they're all gone. I think Tyler Rogers they could consider bringing back, but Cedric Mullins is not re-signing, nor should they. I would be stunned if Ryan Helsley's back. I mean, I can't rule out Gregory Soto, but I'm going to lean towards no. And I'd say Tyler Rogers, there's a puncher's chance they bring back. So every piece that they moved, even if they're not big prospects, and they didn't trade big prospects. Let's calm down about Drew Gilbert. All right, let's all pump the brakes a little bit on freaking Drew Gilbert before we put him in the Hall of Fame. They didn't give up top-line prospects, but they gave up a lot of guys. I mean, it's a total of 11 or 12 assets. Those assets could have been used for something else, and those assets could also become something. It's always possible. We talked about the Jose Siri trade and the fact that the reliever in that deal, Eric Orzi, became a quality reliever for the Tampa Bay Rays. So these are all F trades. They're all Fs because literally they're all gone at the end of the year. You gave up assets that, again, may not be great, but they're not walking through that door again. And none of them helped you. In fact, all of them to a T made you worse. Like, think about that for a second. Cedric Mullins was so bad, he made center field worse. They were better off just running Jeff McNeil out there despite him misjudging fly balls in center field. They were better off. They were better off sticking him out there. They were better off not bothering making a trade for Cedric Mullins. So it doesn't even matter what those assets turn into. Cedric Mullins made the New York Mets worse. That's number one. Number two, Ryan Helsley made the Mets worse. He literally catapulted them into losses they wouldn't have had because he lit games on fire. Now, if he's not up here, is it Justin Hagenman making those pitches? Is it Chris Davinsky making those pitches? I have no idea. It's tough to imagine, though, it's worse. So Ryan Helsley and the trade for Ryan Helsley, not the person, not the player, because we already did grades. The trade for Ryan Helsley is an F-. The trade for Gregory Soto, that's another F. Like, he was good for a month, and then he, too, contributed 2 losses, and he's not being kept. Tyler Rogers, like, he was kind of not as bad as the other 3. That's my compliment of Tyler Rogers. He wasn't as bad as the other 3. But for the most part, he wasn't good enough. And so I judge these trades under the prism of, are they staying? The answer is no. B, you gave up assets where even if they all flame out and turn into nothing, you still lost because none of these players helped you. And if God forbid any of these players turn into something positive, then you lost even worse. So David Stearns' trade deadline is an F. And it is fair to now bring up a very loaded question. But I'm going to ask it anyway. Was David Stearns' trade deadline of Rogers, Helsley, Soto, and Mullins worse than the trade deadline of 2022 when Billy Epler brought in Darren Ruff, Daniel Vogelbach, and Tyler Naquin? I'll take your calls off air. Which deadline was worse? The crap of 22 or the bigger crap of 2025? You tell me.
It's got to be 2025, and I'll tell you why. Because 2022, they had people kept for at least another season, right? Didn't Ruff was able to come back? Like they did that for reason.
How is that a good thing?
I'm joking. No, but in all honesty, the reason why that offseason, though that trade deadline was better, is because Vogelbach, and we compared the stats, and this might be embarrassing, but Juan Soto was also traded to San Diego at that point in time. And Juan Soto's last 2 months of the season were really bad compared to Daniel Vogelbach. And so Vogelbach actually outdid what Soto did. So I'm not sitting here saying that, it was it was amazing, but at least there was a little bit of production. Not amazing, but
first of all, he didn't outdo what Soto did. What Vogelbach did, I'm the creator of those stats, so don't try to outstat me on this. I put that in your head. It was that their numbers were not as far off as they should have been, considering one guy is Juan Soto and the other guy is Daniel Vogelbach. But it's not like Vogelbach out-hit him. That was not the case at all. It was over a period of time after the trade where Soto was struggling. So I do want to clarify. Having the guy back for next year can only be a value if that guy can help you next year.
Right.
So Vogelback and Darren Ruff coming back in 2023 was not necessarily a positive. I look, though, at the trade deadline and I say, all right, those deals didn't work. What should they have done? Look, the Harrison Bader thing is, and I never loved Harrison Bader, but he made sense. He was having a good year. He has played in New York. We know his defense is marvelous. We know he's got the temperament for here. It just always made sense that if you were going to add a center fielder, if you weren't comfortable with McNeil and Taylor out there and Siri coming back from injury, Bader just was simple. And I shudder to think how different things would have been if they had made that trade. If Bader was here instead of Cedric Mullins. I mean, they make the playoffs. I can tell you that right now. There's a handful of games that go differently. And that's a shame. And that may have been the biggest screw up that David Stearns had, that he not only let the player walk away, which I was good with, but then once the player is having a good year and is perfect for what you need, you don't get him and you allow him to go to a trade deadline, to a division rival. Same thing with David Robertson. Like, we talk about adding bullpen help, and I said this on the Rico when it happened. They could have just signed him. Another guy who's pitched in New York, another guy who's been here. And so instead of giving up 3 or 4 assets that may or may not turn into something for Ryan Helsley, where you don't know if he can pitch here, and that's always a risk. Like, I love the Helsley move, but I remember doing those trade deadline shows even saying, look, Hoff, we never know. They are relievers. You're asking them to put them in new roles. You do not know. So I think that the 2 former Mets that he didn't bring back in Bader and Robertson, they're kind of unexcusable, especially the Robertson thing. Like, why would you not sign him? You signed Brooks Raley, which I do want to include in this. Like, signing Brooks Raley may have been one of his best moves outside of Soto. Like, that was a tremendous pre-trade deadline signing. You did that. Why not get David Robertson? You look at the other guys traded. David Bednar went to the Yankees. Camilo Doval, who went to the Yankees. Basically, all the Yankee guys that they acquired. I don't know. I mean, what would have Doval been here? He probably would have struggled too. Bednar may have struggled as well, because I think what we are learning, and we should have known this already, there is an adjustment from going to closer to middleman. There's an adjustment to it. And it doesn't make it an excuse for Ryan Helsley or an excuse for Camilo Doval. It's just the reality that it is. That is an adjustment that guys make. And so maybe next year, the year after, as appealing and sexy as it is to acquire a closer because they are so established, maybe you don't want to acquire a closer because you're asking them to serve such a different role. And that may have hurt Ryan Helsley's adjustment, just like it hurt Camilo Doval's adjustment to the New York Yankees. Like that, Devin Williams, I think, even though Devin Williams struggled as a closer, so I'm not going to include him. Strike that one from the record. I know we can't do that, but strike it from the record. I didn't say that. I already fixed it.
Yeah, I'll delete that. Sure. Okay.
Never delete anything. I want everyone to hear it, but strike it. Like, I just said it and I realized, it doesn't count. So though that's what makes it worse. Sometimes what makes the bad moves worse are the moves you could have made. And I think that those moves we mentioned are moves that he could have made that would have brought his grade up and subsequently would have brought the Mets to the postseason.
No question. And again, like, I don't have to reiterate what you just said, but the fact is, I think that David Stearns totally butchered this trade deadline. There was ample amount of moves he could have made. And the biggest thing that he could have done that we haven't even talked about is it was obvious the bullpen definitely needed some help. But the starting pitching, they needed someone to go strong. And I understand, unless his whole plan was to go and bring up the young kids, you could have gotten a starter pitching. And I know that there wasn't many to be traded, but Shane Bieber was traded. He's still pitching right now in the playoffs. You're telling me that wouldn't have been an asset?
I think Shane Bieber is a great name to bring up. He came with risks, obviously. He had not pitched yet off of Tommy John surgery, but we all like Shane Bieber. I think he was an interesting free agent target as well, and we talked about him. I think that's a fair name to bring up, but there aren't many others. And that's kind of the problem. This is where I don't share your anger towards adding a starting pitcher. Not that they didn't need it. They did need it, obviously. There just wasn't a lot out there. And David Stearns hinted at this during his post-season press conference that we played, did a whole episode going through all his answers, in which he talked about some of the names that was being asked for. And I can imagine. Now, Sandy Alcantara is a guy who I think we're going to kind of get into during the offseason as someone they should target, but I'm not sure if he was ever truly available. Charlie Morton stinks. You brought up Charlie's name. I heard Beningo bring up Charlie Morton's name. That would not have been a good move. That's like adding Cedric Mullins. It's kind of the same thing. Like you're just adding someone for adding someone's sake. They're not good.
He got DFA'd and went back to the Braves.
Yes, that's my point. That's how bad your idea was of adding Charlie Morton, that he got DFA'd by the team that acquired him.
I think I was just throwing it out there because I was desperate for anybody.
No, I get that. That's why. Look, I'm going to give you my final grade on David Stearns in a second. It's going to be bad, obviously. I don't get on him for the lack of starting pitching at the trade deadline because everyone who says it, they say it without examples. So they'll just say they needed to add a starting pitcher. Okay, yeah, their starting pitching sucked. I'm not disagreeing. Who did you want them to add? It was such a horrible trade deadline for starting pitchers being moved. The one guy that got moved was Merrill Kelly. I heard he hates New York. That wouldn't have worked. So I don't get on him for that. But we just went through the offseason, the free agents, the non-free agents, the trades, the trade deadline. This is a D paper. It is a flat-out D paper. It's not good. It's bad. It's not a failing grade, but it's nowhere close to a C or B. Obviously, we are going to need David Stearns to do better on next year's final exam. But I think when you take the deadline, when you take the free agents he didn't sign, did sign, the results, I think it's a straight-up D for David Stearns.
I'm going to go lower. And I know that, like you said, when you have Juan Soto in an offseason, how can you be lower? But I'm going to go to the F+ mark. The plus is because you got Juan Soto. That is a hell of a move, and that is a hell of a commitment, and that's great. But everything else he failed on. And you could tell me the little wins he got, they were little wins. They weren't like, oh, that was amazing. Without this person, this team would have been terrible all season long. No, like this team was terrible pretty much all season long. I mean, it was just mistake after mistake after mistake. I cannot give him higher than an F+. I'm sorry.
Now let's get to Carlos Mendoza. So I've learned something throughout life. Writing stuff down is very important. So come Christmas time and New Year's time, we're going to have these episodes where we count down the worst losses of 2025 and the best wins of 2025. The reason those lists, I think, are pretty accurate is I write them down as it happens. When there is a bad loss, I write it down. May 15th or whatever date. When it is a good win, I write it down. So when I went to grade Carlos Mendoza, I realized something. I never wrote down all the moves that I hated. I never wrote down all the moves I liked. So starting in 2026, we're going to do something very, very important. Every time we do a Rico and I'm like, I hated this move, I'm going to then promptly write it down. And every time I'm like, hey, I love when Mendy did this, I'm going to write it down. So that at the end of the season, we could actually go through his moves. Because I was thinking about this the other day. I can't remember the moves I hate and the moves I like from 162. There were so many. The only move I remember specifically was the very end, was how much I disliked the handling of game 162 and how quickly he pulled Sean Manaea. So next year, I'll go through all the moves. For this year, it's really about my feeling towards watching him over the full season. And my feeling towards Carlos Mendoza in 2025 is he ran out of answers. And it got frustrating for us as fans to hear the same thing said after every loss. Talents in the room, talents in the room, talents in the room, talents in the room. I was also frustrated that he didn't get more creative with his lineup. Some want the same lineup every day. I was screaming from the high heavens, lead off Juan Soto. Just lead him off. Let him get on base. Let Lindor drive him in. So I was a little bothered by some of the lineup decisions. I think his overall handling of the bullpen and some decisions in terms of when to take starters out this year, I thought was awful. Now, we didn't help that he didn't have the greatest options, but more than that, it was, did he maximize the talent in the room? And the answer is no. Mendy had a bad year. Now, I'm on record as saying I wouldn't fire him. I think he definitely should go on a hot seat. I think he clearly will be on a hot seat, especially with how they handled his coaches. So did he give us the answers we wanted from a lineup construction, from an overall look at the way he handled bullpens? But more importantly, did he maximize the talent in the room? Carlos Mendoza also had a D season. Like, it was not good. There were not a lot of redeeming qualities. I didn't feel, despite all the issues that they had in the rotation, boy, Carlos is pushing every button he could. Like, I didn't feel that way. I thought it was a very mediocre year from him. But next year, I'm going to write down every time he makes me happy with a move and every time he makes me angry with a move. And I think we'll have a whole episode dedicated to that next year. But the truth is, like, there's so many moves over the course of a season that I was thinking about it the other day. Like, Evan, what do you remember? I'm like, I remember him pulling Sean Manaea too quickly in game 162. That's what really jumps out at me.
I remember him going to Ryan Helsley over and over and over, and Helsley getting beat over and over and over.
That happened.
But I will tell you this much. I'm going to give him a higher grade than you expect. I'm giving him a C- because, and a lot of it is because you're sitting there saying, he kept on trying to make moves, and maybe a lot of the reason why things went bad were because he just didn't have anybody to go to. And I think that's the actual truth of the matter, was that he tried a lot of things that he was supposed to do, and every time he went that he didn't make a difference what it was. Every scenario was done this season. He went too late with the starting pitcher. He went too early with the starting pitcher. He went perfectly to a relief pitcher. He went at a wrong time to a relief pitcher. It always failed. It didn't make a difference what he did. Every move he made, he pushed the wrong button. And I blame that more on personnel than on Mendoza. At what point in time, like, I'm gonna push this, I'm gonna push Peterson. Like, let him get one more guy. I think he's gonna be able to fight through it. And then he walks somebody else. It's like, oh, dude, what are we doing here? And then you bring the reliever in that you just traded for, who's supposed to be, one of the best relievers out there, and he gives up the base hit that scores the game-winning run or tying run or whatever it is, blows the game open. That happened way too many times with the bullpen specifically that I can't put that on Mendoza. That was, the pieces were given to him and they were broken.
What do you guys think about David Stearns and Carlos Mendoza's grades for 2025? You can always email us, thericob@gmail.com, thericob@gmail.com. Coming up, I can't wait. I am so excited to do this. It's going to be very, very depressing, I warn you, but sometimes depressing is good. How did the Mets not make a comeback when trailing after 8 innings? We are going to do the deepest of deepest dives to try to figure out how the Mets pulled off this miraculous accomplishment of never being able to come back. That deep dive is coming up, plus a deep dive on the specific season that Juan Soto had of 2025. It's all coming up here on the Rico Brogna. We appreciate you listening and downloading and subscribing to another edition of Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.